Thank you all for being here today. What a beautiful day. I'm so proud to talk about my dad. He was a pioneer here in the early days. You're going to learn a lot about his story. This is an effort on the part of museums around the country to record oral traditions before they are forgotten. This is my family's story. Your family also has a story, and I encourage you to write it down and submit it to institutions like this museum so it will not be forgotten. Now, every talk ever given since the beginning of time has started with these 7 words. And we don't want to break with tradition, so we are going to start with these 7 words. Can anyone tell me what these 7 words are? I will help you out. Okay. Can those in the back hear me? Okay? All right. Okay, all right. All right. So, thanks again for coming. Sit back, relax. This is going to take about 35 minutes or so not long enough to get bored. This is a story about my family. So, this is about my dad, Thomas Guthrie Pierce. So I have to start with this so you understand the dynamic of my family. So this is me, and my dad is holding me. So I'm just born, and Dad is 77 years old. So that's one thing you need to know about this story. So Dad used to come home from work, and he would take me downtown. He liked a cup of coffee and a piece of fruit pie at the end of the day. He had 3 favorite restaurants: the Western Steakhouse, the Mandarin, and the Canton. The last 2, the Mandarin and the Canton, were owned by the Wong family. They were good friends with my dad. In the early days, there were many Chinese immigrants in Durango, and the Wongs were some of them. As this says, I am the 16th and last living child of my father, Thomas Guthrie Pierce. Next slide. So this next slide is my dad's 80th birthday party. So the slightly bewildered looking child there on the right is me. I'm 3 years old. I remember this picture being taken, and notice the forest of candles on the birthday cake. And I think my sisters succeeded in lighting them all. Okay. So I had a wonderful childhood. I really did. I was the baby. I had all these nurturing women around. I was spoiled rotten. It was great. My dad and I were great buddies. When he was older, he was cold, so he liked me to sleep with him and warm him up. Now, I know what you ladies are thinking. You're thinking, look at that. Isn't that the cutest little boy you ever saw? He never gave his mama no trouble, or his teachers either. That was good Danny. This is bad Danny. Now, bad Danny showed up as a teenager, and he was around for a long time, and bad Danny spent a lot of time in the principal's office. Fortunately, I grew out of that phase, and I'm now the well-adjusted model citizen that you see before you today. Okay? So here I am with my first Harley Davidson. Unfortunately, my dad passed away just a few months after this picture was taken. I'm 5 years old, summer of 1952. So now these are my older brothers and sisters. This is my dad's first family. These are the people whose stories you're going to hear today. I learned everything I knew about my dad and my family from these people. They're all gone, but these are their stories and their voices you're going to hear today. My name is Danny Pierce. I'm the last child of my father, Thomas Guthrie Pierce. There's no one left to tell his story, so let's begin. General Ulysses S. Grant, Civil War hero, begins his first term as President of the United States. My father, Thomas Guthrie Pierce, is born in Sheraton, Iowa the same year, October 1, 1869. So things were not ideal in my dad's home. By all accounts, his father, my grandfather, Charles, was an abusive man. And so Dad couldn't take it, so at age 14, he ran away. This is part of the story that I don't know, I wish I did, but he ran away and got to Texas. But here are some of the famous and infamous characters that were alive when my dad was. General George Armstrong Custer, steely-eyed commander of the 7th Cavalry, killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn, June 15, 1876. My father is 7 years old. Billy the Kid, notorious killer, shot and killed by one-time friend, Sheriff Pat Garrett. July 14, 1881. My dad is 11 years old. Jesse James, wanted desperado, bank robber, and outlaw, shot dead by one-time friend, Bob Ford. April 3, 1882. My dad is 12 years old. Last but not least, I wanted to put in Geronimo. We did terrible things to the Native Americans. Geronimo was the last of the Apaches to surrender. It took 2 armies, the Mexican army and the American army, to finally run him to ground. Him and his small band of about 100 Chiricahua Apaches were the most awesome guerrilla fighters ever on this planet. He was on the warpath in Mexico, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, 1850 to 1886. Now, somehow Dad got across the United States and ended up in the company of this gentleman here, Charles Goodnight, famous cattleman and Texas Ranger. He gives a home and a job to my father, the young runaway Thomas Pierce, on his ranch at Palo Duro, Texas, 1885. My dad is 15 years old. Now, Goodnight was to become a major historic figure in the Old West. He was a Texas Ranger and a cattleman, and he and his partner, Oliver Loving, start the first of the great cattle drives northward, up into Texas and Colorado and New Mexico. He went to the railroads located there and shipped the beef back east. Now, these towns owe their fame and fortune to the great cattle drives started by Goodnight and Loving. Now, shipping beef back east became big business in the 1880s, and so food for the wranglers was a necessity. So Goodnight invented the chuck wagon to feed the wranglers. Here's a typical chuck wagon. You can see the kitchen is on the back of the wagon there, and the wranglers all sitting around eating their delicious beans, biscuits, beef, and hot coffee. Or you could have it beef, beans, and biscuits the other way. But you could see the big pots of coffee on the bottom. There was always hot, boiling coffee to be had, and they suspected that the cook did his underwear in there too, but we're not sure about that. Okay. Anyway, Dad needed to earn some money, more than he could make working for Goodnight. Goodnight mostly took him in and gave him room and board. He really didn't earn money. So he reluctantly says goodbye to his friend and mentor, Charles Goodnight, and he finds a better paying job in Colorado. Tom Pierce is 17 years old, 1887. Marshall Pass Railroad, at 10,852 feet high, is the first railroad to cross the Continental Divide. Maintaining the tracks and keeping the engines running is a very difficult task. Required strong young men, but the wages were good. This is an actual picture of the Marshall Pass train. Looks like they're stopped there for a photo op. If you've ever ridden a steam engine train, you know you're not going to sit up on top because that spits out cinder and smoke, and it's a pretty rough place. So this was obviously staged. Now that engine, that locomotive there, was involved in an accident later on, and it killed the engineer and the fireman. The DNRGW decided to restore this engine, and it is now in Alamosa, sitting right on the Rio Grande River under a big shed. And if you go through there, you can see that engine sitting there. Now, maintaining a 4% grade, which is a fancy way of saying you go up 4 feet for every 100 feet you travel, is not easy over these Colorado mountains. It required a lot of surveying and engineering to accomplish this feat. A little confusing, but we'll go through this. So the top picture is a cross-section of the mountain through Marshall Pass. And the peak there is the tallest. And if you go down, that's where you would find it. So the squiggly line is the railroad, how it actually got over the mountain. So you can see it was a very difficult route getting over there. It took a lot of engineering to do that. So that's Marshall Pass. Now, Dad carefully saved all his wages from the Marshall Pass job. And after 2 years of very hard labor, he managed to save enough to send for his entire family back east. So his mother and 4 brothers arrive by rail to the tiny mountain town of Crested Butte, Colorado. Now, my dad's older sister, Dora, and her husband, Ed Clark, were already living and working there. So that was part of the draw for them to go to Crested Butte. Not surprisingly, Charles, their abusive father, is left behind, alone, and he died there. Year's 1889. This is my dad and his brothers as they looked and when they arrived in Crested Butte. My dad is the tall one in the center. Again, the year is 1889. I told you that my dad's older sister, Dora, worked in the boarding house at the Bullion gold mine in Irwin, Colorado. She is the cook for the hungry miners. Here is a beautiful autumn day at the Bullion gold mine in Irwin, Colorado. So special edition Denver Republican, Crested Butte, Colorado, February 26, 1891. A deadly snowslide has claimed the lives of 4 victims at the Bullion mine above Irwin, 9 miles from Crested Butte. The worst snowslide ever heard of in the county came down from Ruby Peak about 1 o'clock yesterday, sweeping over the Bullion mine, carrying death and destruction in its wake. The slide started from Ruby Peak 1.5 miles away and gathered snow as it traveled. It struck with such force that the structures were crushed like eggshells and scattered hundreds of feet down the mountain. The big boarding house, all gone, not a whole chair to be found. Fortunately, the miners were all in the shaft house, having just finished dinner. Had the slide been 10 minutes sooner, there would not have been one left to tell the tale. The victims of the slide are Mrs. Ropel, the superintendent's wife, Mrs. Clark, the wife of Ed A. Clark, who kept the boarding house, and her 2-year-old daughter, Grace. Also, Captain B.F. Smiley. These are the unfortunate victims buried in the snow. Mrs. Clark's mother and brothers, Mrs. Pearson and sons, all reside in Crested Butte and are grief-stricken. Poor Ed Clark was down yesterday and seen around town buying little knickknacks for his wife and baby. He started for Irwin about 12 o'clock, little dreaming that those for whom he was toiling were passed away into eternity by a cruel snowslide. Denver Republican, Saturday morning, February 28, 1891, Crested Butte, Colorado. P.F. Ropel leaves here today with the remains of his wife, who was killed in the Bullion snowslide, and will arrive in Denver tomorrow. Mrs. Ed Clark and her baby have both been removed from the snowslide and will be taken to Denver for burial tomorrow. Captain Smiley has not yet been found. Denver Republican, Sunday morning, March 1, 1891. Ed Clark started to Denver today with the remains of his wife and child, victims of the Bullion snowslide. Both were put in one coffin, and it made an effective scene to see the little child in the arms of its mother. Mr. Clark goes to Arvada with them, where his relatives reside. Now, Dora is also pregnant with her second child at the time of the slide. So the Pierce family loses 3 lives in this tragedy. Broken and sick at heart over their loss, they leave Crested Butte as soon as the snow melts, and they move to the newest boom town, Durango, Colorado, spring 1891. The picture a lot of you are familiar with, this is Durango in 1888, and it hadn't changed much by the time my dad got here in spring of 1891. Now, Dad wanted to be his own boss, so along with his brothers, they start the first of two very profitable restaurants in downtown Durango, the Pierce Brothers Cafe and the Hope Cafe, summer 1891. This is the interior of one of the restaurants. I don't know which one it is, but it looks very modern, very nice. Number of guys there at the counter. They did a brisk business. Must have been summer because they got the little squiggly things hanging down, or sticky fly paper. But maybe 4th of July because of the bunting and the banners hanging down. I'm not sure, but it looks festive. The young man in the center, I want you to pay attention if you can see him, standing right by the coffee pot there. That's Charles, Dad's older brother. Now, Charles must have inherited some of Grandpa Charles' disposition because he was fairly difficult to get along with. And so even though the brothers were making a lot of money with the restaurants, things were not happy. And so bickering, things went back and forth. Eventually, Charles moved with his family to Texas. Another problem with Charles, he was a socialist. And back then, that didn't go. And today, even today, we have a discourse in our country that nobody wants to talk to each other. Everybody fights. We need to get back where we can talk civilly. Other people hold their views as much as you hold your views. And we need to give them a little space and talk. And there are heroes on every side of the question. Charles Pierce, loner, socialist, and hero, drowns in the Pecos River, Imperial, Texas, June 9, 1918, while trying to save his son Leslie from the spring floodwaters. Both father and son perish in the attempt. Now, back in Durango, the restaurants are a big success, and the brothers need help, so they soon hire a pretty, blue-eyed Southern girl to help them. The plot thickens. George Ann Bell Mathis and Tom Pierce are both smitten by the love bug, and they are soon married, summer 1894. So Dad's earning pretty good money. He needs to do something with it, so he diversifies his business interests, and he buys a large ranch in New Mexico, just down across the border in Bondad, round there on the bend of the river. And he invests the profits from his two successful Durango restaurants into raising sheep. Now, this is the log house at New Mexico Ranch where Thomas and Belle lived. Belle gave birth to her first 4 children in this rustic cabin in the territory of New Mexico, 1898. This is my dad as he looked at the turn of the century, a young man going places. My father is 30 years old in this picture, 1899. The Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, December 17, 1903. My father is already a successful rancher, has 5 children, and is 34 years old. A few years later, Henry Ford rolls out his first Model T, October 1, 1908. Dad has 7 children, 2 restaurants, and a very lucrative sheep-raising business. 2,000 head of sheep. Where are we going to put them? So it was an easy matter for Dad to load his sheep onto the DNR-GW narrow gauge train, which went right by his ranch. That train was still running when I was a kid. We used to go put pennies on the track and let them squish it when it went over. Anyway, it was right across the street. So Dad put his sheep into boxcars, shipped them up to Silverton, dispersed them into smaller herds of 500 to 600 each. He has summer camps were located on Engineer Mountain, Lime Creek, the flats around Silverton and Howardsville, and up on 12,492 foot high Stony Pass. Prosperity has come at last to my dad after years of struggle. So this is summer sheep camp somewhere high in the mountains. The man standing in front of the tent is my older brother, Pat Pierce. Pat is 34 years older than I am. The Mexican herder, we believe his name was Appion. Now, delivering supplies up to the high mountain meadows, there's only one way to do it back then, was by pack train. Again, this is my brother, Pat Pierce, showing off with his new Winchester 30-30 rifle. Written on the back of this photograph, top of Stony Pass, sheep camp for the summer. Our tents are on top of these mountains. How do you like them? July 1st. I'm a native here. I have camped at 12,000 feet. It's darn cold up there in the summertime. So that was taken July 1st. Look at all that snow. They had a tough winter. That had to be pretty chilly sheep herding. So now Dad's idea of locating his ranch in New Mexico turns out to be a very fortuitous choice. He's able to load his sheep onto the train and just ship them up long distances rather than herd them. This choice also avoids any bloody conflicts with the cattlemen whose blind hatred of the sheepmen led to the indiscriminate slaughter of many sheep herds and the murder of a number of sheep herders. Now, for a more in-depth account of the sheep wars, I invite you to purchase or look at Dr. Gilliford's excellent book. Purchase. The Woolly West, which will give you a much better idea of the bloodshed and stuff that went on back there. It was brutal. It was tough. Pancho Villa, Mexican revolutionary and bandito, stages a bloody and failed raid on the American arsenal at Columbus, New Mexico, March 9, 1916. They were waiting for him. Tom Pierce is 47 years old, living in Durango, has 9 children, and is still raising sheep on his ranch in New Mexico. Georgianne Bell Mathis Pierce dies unexpectedly after a minor surgery to remove a cyst, April 5, 1917. Now, only one day after Bell's death, the United States enters World War I, April 6, 1917. Now, during the 24 years of their marriage, Thomas and Bell have given birth to 13 children. Bell's death leaves Thomas alone with 9 children at home. 4 others died in infancy. Now, after the death of his wife, Bell, my dad threw himself into his work. He quickly expanded his business interests to include 2 working coal mines and a brickyard for the rapidly growing boomtown of Durango. He also invested in precious metal mines in the surrounding area. Now, this is my dad, and the ladies in the town, he had suddenly come to the attention of the single women in town. So the marital status of my dad was not lost on the single women in Durango, and during the next 13 years, he received numerous invitations to Sunday afternoon luncheons and invited to afternoon teas and other social functions where single eligible ladies just happened to be present. He wisely declined most invitations. However, lest you think my dad was a monk during those 13 years, he was not. Now, it wasn't like it is nowadays, everybody just, doing all that. It was very discreet. And there was several ladies that his name was attached to, and one I got to meet. I did a job for her. Beautiful patrician woman, sweet lady. She lit up like a Christmas tree when she talked about Dad. I could tell you her name, but I'm not. You would recognize it. She's from a prominent Durango family. This is my favorite sister, Laura, and her husband, Everett Bixler. Now, Laura is the unseen person in many of these photographs because she's taken the picture. So she's present even though she's not in front of the camera. Everett was Dad's foreman for many of the projects. Very smart man, ran the brickyard, ran the coal mines. He was always there to help Dad. I miss them very much. So I've titled this, Evening at the Pierce Brothers Sunshine Coal Mine. This is looking west towards Hesperus, Colorado. And if you're going to go to Cortez, you go right past where the mine was. The only thing that remains of this is a small brick house where some of the Powell people lived, who are also relatives. This is the Peerless Coal Mine, tipple number 2. For years, the Pierce Brothers mining camp was the end of the road. This is about 1921. And again, if you're going to Cortez, you're going to go right through here. So this is the straightaway just before Durango West. And there were about 7 coal mines down in here. The Peerless, the Victory, the Sunshine, the Morning Star, the Black Diamond. There was a small coal camp out there. Anyway, this was the end of the road, 1921. Underground in the Peerless Coal Mine, mining was very dangerous. Low roof, sandstone roof, methane, black lung, and that was the good part. I mean, it was just terribly dangerous, but it made good money. Also, my dad's coal was really high grade bituminous coal, low sulfur, high heat. So it was excellent for blacksmithing coal. And that was on one of his advertisements, was blacksmithing coal grade. So the high grade coal produced in Dad's mines went to a lot of places. Durango homes, the train, the power plant that used to use coal. And it was used as coking coal also when the smelter was located on the Animas River. Now I told you Dad had a brickyard, so these are bricks. But you can see there's different kinds of bricks in here at the bottom. They're kind of serrated and redder and got white bricks up there. So this is a load of bricks as they come out of the kiln. How do you make bricks? I am so glad you asked me that question. Members of the Pierce family visiting the Brickyard. Now the building over to the right is where the raw clay was screened and pressed into brick molds. And then behind the old car, there were 2 of these very large, round firing kilns where they moved the raw clay and put it in there to fire using coal from Dad's coal mines. Very synergistic. Here's my dad delivering a load of bricks, and on the back of the photograph, it said, bricks going to the Smiley Junior High. Now, Dad's bricks form the structure of many homes and businesses in the area. Here are just 3 examples that I know about that I heard my family talk about. Smiley Junior High School, Durango, Colorado. Pierce Company bricks hold this building together, and that is a lot of bricks. The iconic and magnificent Strader Hotel. The Pierce bricks were used in the new addition on the back. There's a definite demarcation if you look at the Strader. There's a whole new section on the back that were used that are Dad's bricks. 4th of July celebration downtown Durango on Main Street. The J.C. Penney building is gaily decorated, and Dad's bricks were used to make these 2 buildings, and all of these buildings are still standing. And there's many more. These are 3 I know about. So the good times don't last forever. So in the 1930s, it brings the Great Depression and the horrific Dust Bowl. Now the rich and the wealthy always find ways to survive, but the poor suffered greatly during the next 10-year period. Shanty towns sprang up like mushrooms after a rain. It's the poor huddled together in drafty wooden tar paper shacks, trying to stay warm and stave off starvation. I don't know if you can see that, but I think that's kind of what hell looked like. Durango had 2 shanty towns in the early days. Mexican Flats, where the sewer plant is now, and Webtown. This is where the poor people lived, in drafty wood and tar paper shacks. Now these are mostly Mexican people, but there were some Greeks and some Welsh people also who lived there. These forgotten people were the most affected by the Depression. There were no jobs available, and there was no money anywhere. It was very tough. My dad, he knew these people. They were friends. They were customers. But they had no money, but Dad knew that, and he had compassion for them. Now this is a shanty town. I picked this one because it looks like what we used to call Mexican Flats. This looks very much like Mexican Flats. This is Chicago. But these were all over America because people had lost homes, businesses. They had nowhere to go. So they put up houses with anything that they could. Now this is what it looks like up close. This was the Depression, and this was the reality for many American families. Now during the Depression years, my dad had coal trucks that made no-charge deliveries in these towns. Dad didn't care about the color of their skin or lack of social status. He gave what he could. He had coal. Nobody had any money, but Dad did have coal. And he gave what he could, quietly, without fanfare, and with no expectation he would ever be repaid. Now, my mom told me how this worked back. The men would come up in the evening when they knew Dad was there, and they would knock quietly on the door, and they would have their hat in their hand, and they would ask for Mr. Pierce, and Mom knew what they were going to do, and they would tell him, Mr. Pierce, we're out of coal again. And he would say, but you haven't paid me for the last 5 loads. He said, we know, but we have no coal, and we need it to heat and to feed, cook on. So the next day, Dad would tell his drivers, go by wherever and kick off a ton of coal. So for 10 years, Dad did this, helping keep people alive. So in the middle of all this gloom and doom, Dad got married again. He gives up the life of a bachelor, and he selects the charming widow, Lila Stonebarger Powell, to be his second wife. Now, Tom is 66, and Lila is 33, 1935. Now, I've been talking about my dad. I'm going to talk about my mom a little bit. I'm going to brag on her. This is my beautiful mom, Lila Matilda, 1935. So you would ask, why would Dad select Lila? He obviously had a number of ladies interested in him, and things were going good. Well, she's a total babe. Look at her. And she had a great figure. Second reason was they had known each other for years. My mom's first husband, Pete Powell, had worked for my father, Tom Pierce, in his coal mines. So they had known each other for a long time. Unfortunately, Pete got kidney disease and passed away at age 35, leaving my mom a widow. The plot thickens. Another reason, Mom was a great cook. She really knew her way around the kitchen. She was a very religious person. Mom not only went to church on the weekends, she went to prayer meeting on Wednesday night. Now, this wasn't a big problem for most people, but it was one for me because she drugged me along. Didn't really care for that. But anyway, and then also one other thing. My mom had what would be called photographic or eidetic memory. She never forgot anything. She became Dad's bookkeeper, but she knew people, places, things, anniversaries, deaths, long strings of numbers, just anything. And later years, when she was in her 90s, Mom made it to 99, we would take her out once a week and go to a restaurant to eat. And it didn't matter how long it had been since we had been at that restaurant, she would tell us what we had eaten the last time we were there. It was phenomenal. So the next screen is kind of self-explanatory. Okay. So these are my mom and dad, newlyweds. Right after they were married, they're taking a stroll up on top of College Hill. It used to be called Reservoir Hill. The smoke in the background is from the smelter located on the Animas River down below, June 1935. Now, over the next 9 years, they will add 3 more sons into the Pierce family. Their last son is Danny, that's me, Thomas Pierce's 16th child. World War II starts with the surprise bombing of Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. My dad has remarried, has 15 children, and is living comfortably in Durango as a businessman, Victorian gentleman, and one of the very early pioneers of Durango. My dad is 72 years old. Now, I told you that Dad dabbled in precious metal mining. I don't know if he ever made any money at this. I think the sheep and the coal and the bricks is where he made most of his money, but he did have precious metal mines. During the war years, you could not get material that wasn't deemed necessary for the war effort. So if you had precious metal mines, you couldn't get powder, you couldn't get steel. So the mines were shut down, but you still had to check on them. You had machinery in the buildings, and the tunnels tended to cave in and water up. So this is checking on his mine up on Red Mountain, 1943. The world enters the atomic age with the bombing of Hiroshima, Japan, August 6, 1945. Tom Pierce is still working and 76 years old. Now this is the last picture I'm going to show you of Dad. I'm going to leave him here. Dad's working on a house. He's building a house with his own bricks, and that's his youngest daughter, Laura. He works because he wants to. He doesn't need the money, but he enjoys working, and he had a lot of bricks. So here he is at age 78. I am just about 6 months old when this picture is taken, 1947. Dad lives for 5 more years, succumbing to his final illness at age 83. His funeral, which I vividly remember, was one of the largest events held in Durango. Hood Mortuary and the grounds were literally crammed with mourners and well-wishers. Inside, along with the flowers and the mourners and the lawyers and the bankers and the dignitaries, were many of the people from the shanty towns. They had come to pay their last respects to the man who had helped them in their time of need. A fitting tribute to a generous and honorable man. To sum up, a lot of what I know about my dad came from my family and from strangers. Growing up in Durango, I met a lot of the old-timers who had known my dad. And as soon as they found out that I was Tom Pierce's boy, they would pull me aside and tell me some story about an escapade they had had with Father or some kindness that he had shown them. This was unfailingly true for everyone I met, and it made me so proud to be his son.